to reach points where they just can develop themselves. And similar things are happening also in other sectors. In healthcare sector, it's probably a good example. We found in Kenya that if healthcare volunteers who typically walk to reach the distant patients for 5-10 kilometers one way, if they are being provided bicycles, they typically visit like 88% more patients. They spend more time with them and are able to also help them in case of emergency. If we look like in African continent, like 75% of the deaths that could have been prevented, they did not, because people either didn't reach the clinic center or the services didn't reach them. So this is like how important it is really to this last mile connection. And in the economic development, anything is connected to the transportation many times, right? Let's take dairy farmers. If they have been having robust bicycles, we measured that they were able to sell 23% more milk as without. That means they are increasing their income, and in any other sector that happens too. And milk is also perishable good, which needs to be cooled and needs to move quickly. So, and in these areas, but there are no even roads, bicycle is also this wonderful solution that makes a difference even on the footpath, because these houses are many times even kilometers away from what we would call a road, even if it's a dust road. So any other transportation is not reaching and will not reach probably in the next decade or so. So bicycles can really make an immediate impact in a climate-friendly way on the top of everything. So that's probably just a few comments from my side.
Yeah, thanks. I'd like to open it up to Lotte. Yeah, please. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Danish, so I'm a vivid biker. I live in Copenhagen and I take my bike everywhere. That's my best friend, and if I have a puncture, that's the worst thing that can happen to me. I think it's very interesting, and it's very good to hear your perspectives on sort of how you get access to opportunities for women in particular, and for access to work and access to so many things. So there's a lot going on there. I was just picking up because you talked about right, and you talked about mobility as a right and safety as a right. I think it's a very crucial and central point to a lot of these things, because we also have to be able to exercise that right. So giving someone a bicycle is an amazing opportunity, but you also have to be safe, and you also have to be provided that level of safety that can enable you to exercise your right to freedom and to mobility and all these things. So what has been your experiences around the infrastructure, sort of the safe system that comes with making sure that it's not the person's responsibility, but it's actually the system that has to be designed so that people can exercise that right in a safe manner?
Well, I think start with bicycles, and then we'll go back that way through Daniel and Linda, if you want to come in.
Yeah, good always to have some bicycle fans in the group. So in the areas where we focused on, like very rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa, but also we do some work in Colombia, we see that most of the time people are spending, again, offside, even off roads. So it means that many times they are not even sharing the access to certain points, to water, wood collection or school with any other transportation means. So in that sector, that's kind of easy one, that the risk is not being significantly increased when you move from walking to cycling. It's definitely a different case when you start to sharing roads. So that's definitely where the policymakers definitely need to make sure that there's awareness, and also by design it's being well thought through from the beginning, that roads are not just for motorized vehicles. That this is really for everyone, people who are walking, people who are cycling. So that's definitely an issue. And part that we can deliver as an organization when we work with the communities to create these mobilized communities, We make sure that we also include bike safety trainings along with bicycle repair workshops and training mechanics to make sure that punctures are being repaired. So this is really kind of one bit from our side that we introduced. We also invite typically local police officers to join the distributions when bicycles are being handed out, so that the ones who now get faster go further, that they are aware also of rules on the streets. But this is just from the non-motorized. So I think there's another piece that needs to happen on motorized transport side too.
Yeah, Daniel, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just around the safety of our system, I think this is a really interesting point. Obviously, there's not necessarily an issue with our system and road transportation safety because we're flying, but we've worked really closely with regulators. So if you take Ghana, the Ghana Civil Aviation Authority, to ensure that the way we fly, there's no. There's not going to be any chance that there's people injured in the process of delivering these packages. And so the first thing is every flight, before it actually leaves the distribution center, we have a flight operator that calls in to the aviation regulator on a radio and gets the all clearance to fly before the drone actually leaves the bay. And so that's the first thing. This is integrated into the existing regulatory framework and the existing airspace very carefully, with clearance for every single flight before it leaves the bay. And then the second thing is when the drones are actually in the air, so we've got a safety system where if there's an issue and we're told by the regulator that we need to land immediately, the drone can deploy a safety parachute, and the drone descends to the ground safely and comfortably under this parachute. And then we can also click a button and put these drones into a holding pattern. And so let's say that there was an issue where we were told not to land, but just the drone should stay exactly where it is. It can just enter a holding pattern in the sky for any period of time that the regulator deems appropriate. And so over the 300 flights that we've done, we've never had a human safety incident. And so we've essentially got a perfect safety record when it comes to zipline's record in the skies.
Linda, you wanted to? Well, Linda next. I mean,
Well,
just talk. Just talk. Don't touch any buttons. Just talk.
Now I can. Yes. So for aviation safety is #1 priority, and I was talking also about rights because when I started in this position and specifically on working for making air transport accessible for passengers with disabilities and the elders. One of the first things that we did is, first of all, investigate on what needed to be done, because it's okay, it's a right, it's safety, it's a social. There is a social component. Yeah, but what do you do with that? You have to make aviation accessible. So when I started, the first thing I did, I spoke to the passengers. There were a few colleagues in IATA who had a disability. At the time, it was a physical disability because now we are focusing as well on invisible disabilities. That is a big component of the disability in itself. So we started to understand where the issue was on aviation and how we could make the travel more comfortable for them. Once we identified the priorities, then what we did was a top-down commitment. So IATA in 2019, all our CEOs signed a resolution It is a resolution on the rights of persons with disabilities traveling by air. And with this resolution, we have a set of principles that talk to the policymakers, but talk to the airlines and airports as well. To the policymakers for good policy design, because, you know, when sometimes in policies, in the design in itself, there are, with all those, for example, proposed rulemaking, there is the tentative to assess something that is still seen as a problem. This is not a problem. The problem is us, because infrastructures and the society itself is not accessible. So it's important from a policy-making perspective that there is a discussion and there is a collaboration between all the different sectors. And when it comes to transport, to all the sectors of the transport itself, because there has to be this connection between. Just to give you an example, aviation works by. We work by codes, and each code means something. Rail and road, they use our codes as well, but doesn't mean the same thing. So the communication doesn't go through. And this is part of the policymaking in itself, because there is not this integration of transport as one, but there are segments. It's time probably that is looked differently. And also, in the process itself, what we need to do on ourselves to make sure that our processes work. And it goes as well with awareness raising. For example, passengers don't know what to expect when traveling by air sometimes, or which kind of services they have to expect, they can expect. Or they don't know that they have to notify the assistance service request in advance to have the right service. So it's about awareness raising. It's about training to our staff. The staff still doesn't know how they have to support the passenger in some cases, because disability is a big topic, and it's not only about reduced mobility, but as I said before, it's invisible disability, it's Alzheimer. We are in a research group with universities in Canada on researching about how to assist passengers who have Alzheimer, for example. It's huge. So it's a right, it's true, but what do we do once we recognize is a right? How we cascade that into practical actions? Because at the end, I mean, it's about that. It's making sure that our not only infrastructure, but the processes, the policy, all work together. So,
Neil, did you want to take us back to bicycles?
Yeah, I don't want Steve Phillips to be the only one to make a provocative statement. So. Prior to becoming Executive Director of the Transportation Research Board, I was State Highway Administrator in the state of Maryland in the United States. And I decided that I needed to have, particularly our traffic engineers, but all of our engineers, have a major cultural shift in terms of their thinking what their job was. Most of them thought their job was to try to get as many vehicles as possible, whether it was on links of roadways or through intersections or whatever, through these sections as safely as possible. And I said to them, I want you to completely rethink who you're trying to accommodate within the rights of way of our roadways. And we have 5 different types of customers. Yes, we have the cars, we have the trucks that you've always been worried about, but we also have transit vehicles, we have bicyclists, and we have pedestrians. And it is our obligation to ensure that we have the safety of all 5 of those users. And all 5 of them have a right to safety. So even just simple things like requiring traffic engineers to go out on a bicycle and ride a roadway before they start to decide what changes they're going to be able to make, or have them go out in a wheelchair and experience what it is like to try to cross roadways in a wheelchair, experience it from the perspective of the people who we are trying to accommodate, not just accommodate, but ensure the safety of as well, and really rethink who it is that we are trying to accommodate within the rights of way of our roadways themselves. And it requires a cultural shift. And I will tell you that I'm older, so I can say this. The younger engineers, they adapted to it right away. It was the ones like me that had been taught that our job was to try to get as many vehicles as possible through intersections or on links of roadways that had the more difficult problem. But that is a cultural shift that we really need to be having within the transportation agencies themselves.
Yeah, that's wonderful comment, and I will just maybe build on that. When we work, what we urge everyone when thinking about transport to really design all the programs in very human-centered way. And if I listen to Neil, it's exactly the direction that they're also going. Really thinking, putting yourself in the shoes of others. And even in that room, there are probably not many people who are living or even grew up in very, very rural areas. So we have very little experiences of what does it exactly mean? What do people face every single day with from sunrise to sundown? So whenever you have the opportunity, I would also invite just really to experience that. And if the real travel is not possible, just really take the time to inform yourself about all these people that many times in these conferences, they are simply not visible. They are invisible. They don't come here and don't speak up for them. So I'm obviously very grateful that we have been invited at least to share our experiences on their behalf. But this is what we are so excited. If we will continue thinking in a human-centered way, including all these 1 billion people that most of us never meet because they are so far, they never make to any conference, they don't even make to a hospital if needed. If we will continue that, then we'll go pretty far, and connecting with very advanced technology and some very basic technology, because some basic technology can make also a big difference. So I think we really should just think of both, not only about technology, but human first and also about technology second.
Great, and I think Emma wants to pick up at exactly that point. Just before you start, Emma, Jana, I think you want to come in. Just keep going, just keep talking.
No, it was off. Seriously, it was off. I just want to come in a bit. Maybe I don't want to be too pessimistic, and I'm myself coming from the road safety perspective, and cycling is something I'm passionate about, and cycling in Africa, particularly. I did also hear a presentation about cycling in Africa, but I'm just seeing, and I'm coming there with Christina, there is not even access there. So for now, we need to, there is one concept that we have been working in GIZ in Liberia, is to build cycling or motorcycle lanes, paths into the communities where currently there is nothing. There is only footpaths, and there is no even bridges over small streams or rivers, and that people, you gave some data, according to my data there, for example, for particular this country, 50% of the population lives 2.5 kilometers away from the roads or more. Right? At least 2.5 kilometers. So that means no access to markets. That means they live in substantial economy. They do not produce agricultural goods because they cannot get to the market. They do not have access to health. They do not have access to education. And these people, they at least need access first, at least some kind of path that they can get to the roads, and then they can get to the world. And the safety issue, of course, comes after, but the first thing is at all access. And this is, I think this is what we were talking about. And unfortunately, I don't see any, if there is any banks here, but this is my question, how to make the development banks to finance those very actually cheap solutions, $1,000 to $5,000 per kilometer. Those roads, these motorbike lanes or bicycle lanes cost into the communities. It's very cheap solution that makes so many people access to the roads, access to the world. Thank you.
Yeah, I think let's go to Emma first, and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jana, for that comment. I totally agree, although in a different context. And what I'm going to talk about actually is some work that we've been doing with one of the banks, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. I'll say just a couple of things about EAST, the organization I run. We're an NGO based in the United Kingdom, but we work with NGOs in 15 other countries, and they're on the ground all the time in Central Asia, as Steve was saying, Caucasus, Eastern Europe, working on road safety and all issues to do with the safe system that Lotte was mentioning, road infrastructure, behavior, policing, everything. And I want to focus on, well, I'll start by saying that I've seen all over the region, and I'm sure it happens all over the world, huge road infrastructure projects, connecting cities, transport corridors, connecting countries. And these are very important projects, and for the countries involved, financially very important. But what is happening, and Neil said he'd like to hear the difference between high-income countries and low-income countries, is not actually very different from what you're describing. You're ending up with rural populations along the side of these corridors, disconnected, increasingly disconnected. And maybe in Kyrgyzstan, it's not a matter of the footpaths leading you to the road, because there may be a rural road that's very badly pitted and muddy. But there's the same problem of living 2.5, 3, 4 kilometers away from any meaningful roadway. And so the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, I want to focus on this particular study because we're very proud of it. They felt this was a problem, which I think is really good. And they wanted to know the impact on rural communities, and in particular women. And we haven't spoken much about women, and their economic opportunity linked to their big road bill. So they commissioned us, the gender team and the road safety team, to do some survey work. And what we did was, in the United Kingdom, we do a regular transport diary thing, which is online. Over 20,000 people do it. It gives a lot of very useful information. I know other cities do it around the world, other countries do this. We've created a similar sort of survey, but adapted it to low-income country. If you're interested, I can tell you how we did that. But what we found was, going into these communities in Obigom-Nurabod area of Tajikistan, very mountainous, excuse me, sorry, quick water. Very mountainous. By and large, not that good for bicycles, because also very severe winters, extremes in climate, really pitted, terrible roads. So a bicycle would be helpful, but it's not the ultimate solution in these parts of the world. And we found out what was going on, what sort of mobility. What we found, we've seen in other countries. I'm using Tajikistan as an example. We do a lot of work with rural communities everywhere where we work. We saw that communities were being increasingly disenfranchised. Their access to economic opportunity, to social opportunity, was hugely impacted by a lack of mobility. And that lack of mobility was getting worse with all these major road builds. Before, they could just about potter along on these very pitted roads. You know, if they had a horse cart, they could just about potter along. Superhighways, absolutely not, although we see it happening in, you know, terrible. One of my colleagues found a horse 300 meters away from the road after a collision with a horse cart, and these things are happening. But, so, what is the argument for the banks? Going back to Jana's question, the economic argument. These communities in Tajikistan, I'll tell you a little bit about them. The people there are highly skilled. This is an area where the men work as guest workers, in fact, in the Russian Federation and other countries. So they're away for most of the year. and sending remittances back, the women do everything. The women know how to repair a boiler. They know how to do everything, and they do everything. They do most of the agriculture. They look after the animals, look after the children. They look after elderly people. They do everything. They're not unskilled. Some of them had degrees. We did surveys. Our survey included what skills, what level of education. All of them were literate. One of the things you have to say about Tajik education policy, all of them were literate. But most of them, only 4% of the women were employed in any way. And not that many more of the men. I think it was about 17% of the men had employment. And the women were not only unemployed, but for large parts of the year, they had no access to mobility whatsoever. Only half of all households had access to a motor vehicle at all. And none of the women did. None of the women could drive. Not a single one. So we're not talking about, new roadways helping them, at least initially. And the main method of transportation was walking. And some of the children walked 6 kilometers a day to go to the local school. That's the local school. So when we spoke to these communities, they didn't have no ambitions, they had ambitions. They wanted to make crafts, they wanted to take their agricultural products to market, but there was no way of doing that effectively. And so I was really grateful for the invitation to speak at this, because I feel that this is something we are not grasping, and all of the other speakers have pulled on lots of threads that touch on this area. I think we've been forgetting rural communities and communities that are currently disenfranchised from mobility. Speaking personally, our son was in a wheelchair with motor neuron disease, and we couldn't find a taxi locally that would take his wheelchair. So little things like that in a high-income country, there's still people being excluded from mobility. And I think we need to think smartly about this. And the EBRD were encouraging this research. They wanted ideas from us. We've produced a toolkit for them for using in rural communities. But they are now thinking further about how to develop economic opportunities, particularly for women in these areas. And one thing, we need to think about smart hubs, and maybe drone technology can come into this. It's probably unrealistic to think that certainly the Tajik government is very poor. They don't have resources. The donors are not thinking of rural areas. It would be very expensive to build new roads. But we need to find some access, maxi taxis, other things. And think this was a very conservative community where women did not travel with strange men. They didn't travel with men unless they were accompanied by other women or another man, and actually personal security is an issue everywhere in the world for women. So we need to think too about personal security and other areas to do with mobility, and build hubs which would give them at least access to other hubs where they would gain mobility. If women in the community wanted to travel to the market in Nurabad, there would be maybe an at-demand call for a maxi taxi that would come, and at very low cost, because affordability is a huge issue, take them there. But I also think we need to think, and our colleague from New Zealand raised it, of the issue about digital connectivity. And because so much, if you have digital connectivity, you can apply for a job online. And it has to be meaningful. It doesn't mean waiting for half an hour to download 1 megabyte of data, which happens. It means being able to right away ring emergency services, which we found is not the case all over countries where we work. It means being able to order things and being able to place your orders, send your goods, and ring the drone service or whatever. I think there's a huge opportunity for really creative thinking about reaching people in rural areas. And not necessarily, East is a virtual, we don't have an office. We all work virtually around the globe. And you can do an awful lot without traveling anywhere. And maybe thinking smartly about bringing jobs to where the people are. and connecting them in that way. But there's a huge challenge because low-income communities also are very badly serviced by internet connectivity and digital opportunity. So I could talk for hours and I won't.
Well, I think we've got two people that want to talk as well.
Thank you. Andy, Toyota Mobility Foundation. It might be strange now that I'm outing myself. I'm a big bicycle fan. We're running 2 projects, matter of fact 3 in Africa, and I want to give you exactly that. One thing I would ask, don't make the mistakes we made here in Europe, putting policies out before really involving the locals. I think we have to forget everything we did here because the car was too dominating in the Western world, and we have to reverse that. So policy, Africa has to be something. And if you travel through Tanzania, Kenya, and you see that the bicycle is already a life-changing tool for kids that go to school, we don't have to worry about safety because they walk 5 kilometers and it already gives them much faster access, number one. Number two, I think also what you brought up, how do we develop local economies? We're working together with a foundation called Mobility for Africa. We currently give families in Tanzania, women, access to battery electric vehicles they can charge locally. The whole system is built only for women, so only women get trained to drive these cars. They learn how to change the battery. We import them from China for $1,600 and all that, to allow them to transport their goods, their needs. They have to go to the market. But we have to work with them. And I think this is the chance we have. Digital solutions like in Rwanda, Kenya and all that. We work with fishermen, the Siemens Foundation at Lake Victoria, to give them engines that bring them out on the sea, not on oil or fuel. They run electric and they save $8 a day, which is a huge amount of money. So there's so many examples where local economies and where we can learn also, because Africa is used to share. And we have to come also here in the Western world back to a sharing world, that not everyone owns a vehicle, that everyone needs to consume a tremendous space in our cities and to create our cities lively again. And today we have the technology, and it's a giving and taking and learning, and particularly drone solutions in Africa where distances are wide, where we don't have the regulatory issues, can help us really to progress and give opportunity in rural areas what we really need. Getting out of the cities, because we, in my belief, we made the wrong decisions in the past building megacities. 97% of the cities already today have climate issues. If we bring opportunities out to the countryside, this offers us opportunities also to address climate issues and also energy issues, because the megacities are our problem. Thank you.
Thank you. And Steve, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thanks. Steve Phillips, Conference European Directors of Roads. I guess first thing I'd say, Steve, and for the panel, this is the best session I've attended this whole of forum, and I really congratulate for that. I think it's also great. I mean, I feel like, you know, I'm with like-minded people because, you know, I'm hearing so many of the things that, yeah, I wanted to say that, I wanted to say that. I just want to, I guess, reinforce a couple of things. I totally agree, you know, the question of adapting to climate change, but also the greater recognition of the health effects and people's cognitive, you know, well-being. You know, we have the situation, and I've seen so many studies now where people are spending millions to try and recreate the, you know, the rural environment in cities because people are happier, and I just think, well, why? But going on, Jana raised the issue of infrastructure, which of course is core to my heart, and I totally agree. I think, you know, there's huge opportunities there. You know, a bridge for a bicycle is much cheaper than a bridge for a you know, a 30-ton truck. But more than that, you know, even within Europe, we have the issue where we are building these, you know, multi-million euro bridges, and then not thinking, actually, if we put a tunnel in there or make it a bit wider, actually the bicycles, so then we're spending more millions afterwards to put in the bicycle facilities. So this kind of future-proofing the type of projects that the EBRD and all the others are putting billions into, well, you know, that's a no-brainer. But actually, and then there's the digital connectivity. Again, I think this is a policy issue I would really like the ITF to take up. You know, we've seen some good examples of policies adopted by governments to encourage the telecoms operators to cover the rural populations. Others where it's just selling the licenses to the bandwidth, for the maximum amount of money with no obligations on them. So the whole area of linking, public service obligations for transport and for telecoms, and then in the future for energies, is important. And the other thing I wanted to get back to Christina, because I'm fascinated by the work you're doing, and I'm really interested to know how much of the very clever work and attention that's being spent in Europe towards things like cycling for urban areas, cargo bikes, e-bikes, bicycles for disabled people or whatever, is that filtering into your work, or is that still out of reach?
Yeah, good question, and thanks. I would say when we think about 1 billion people are walking, so the task is so big in the front of us. We as World Bicycle Relief just surpassed 650,000 bicycles delivered since our inception. So this just shows how big the gap is. And this is at least why we feel like that we feel obliged to focus on getting as many people on bikes as possible before we go and look more specialized for more specialized applications. Because as I think you both mentioned, bicycles are just including women and also including children. So it's one of the most inclusive transportation tool at all. It's really age including, income including, gender inclusive. So this is why for the moment we feel like focusing on getting as many people as possible on this very simple single speed bike is probably the most biggest ROI on investment. But you're right, and we spoke a lot about also special needs. Once we get basics covered, we will definitely need to think of solutions. How do we cope? How do we include everyone after all? And bicycle will be probably not the silver bullet for everyone, or we will need to be more specialized. But before we even go there, it's so easy to really access millions if we really kind of no longer overlook in the policy that rural transportation is an issue, the systematic issue. I think this is what we all agree today, and that we really need to increase investments, and as long as we are concerned at least, that we also recognize that bicycles is an should be equal and integral part of mass transportation solution. It's not being considered often that way, right? And this is why I like to think about how we started thinking differently about energy sector, right? We have grids in the urban areas. We have eventually grids in the para-urban areas. But I think we all kind of already came to this recognition that in very rural settings, we might need off-grid solutions to make sure that people access to this essential need, energy. And this is what I would hope that we can move towards to acknowledging that this is how we need to think also about rural transportation. The urban solutions with metros and whatever will be not the solutions for urban areas with low density areas. And this is where such solutions that today are considered as intermediate transport tools would no longer be considered as such.
Thank you, Christina. You get the last word. I'd just like to close by saying that, we did at the ITF put out a report 6 months ago on accessibility in rural and remote areas. And fortunately, our first recommendation was where we started today with the comments from David and others, that we do need at the Ministry of Transport levels to establish nationwide accessibility policies that take the whole of the country seriously. And one tool we suggested was to develop regional sustainable mobility plans in the same way we have urban sustainability plans, which have really, I think, revolutionized things in Europe. They put the onus on the local governments to really look at their mobility policies and start incorporating walking, cycling, a lot of other neglected parts of the system into their core planning. And maybe we can do that for the rural areas as well, and start at least the responsibilities of our transport ministers can start from that point on this governance agenda. So I won't say any more. You can find the reference to that at our stand. There's a Q code you can click on. So I'd like just to thank all of you who participated and all of our panelists for I learned a lot of things. It's a very interesting session. Thank you all for preparing for it. So if we could just show our appreciation to all the panelists.